thinking about digital currency in general, like digital finance, it's one of the big transformations of our world in some sense. It's not just about money. Or you could argue that money is everything. I mean, it's like money isn't just the narrow definition of money. Money is really everything. And so you could argue that sort of cryptocurrency is like the base layer of this transformation to the digital space, and everything else would just be built on top of it.
I use a different word that I think is kind of closer to your world, which is it's ultimately automation. And what I mean by that is, before 1970 or 1980, all the assets were analog. And so when you have analog assets, physical stock certificates, physical bonds, right, physical deed to a home, you have to physically exchange them.
Yeah.
When we wanted to increase transactions and increase kind of global finance and access, we took those physical assets and we created electronic QSIP assets. So now we have in centralized databases kind of a file represents the asset that's sitting somewhere in custody, and you and I can transact them a little bit easier. But it's still centralized. There's still some bureaucracy, and maybe it takes 2 days to transact rather than actually mailing it across the world. Now what we're seeing is a transition from those electronic QSIPs to these digital assets. And so if you look at, again, just let's say money or currency, every currency in the world is going to be digital. You're going to have a digital dollar, a digital euro, yen, RMB. You're going to have decentralized kind of open source money like Bitcoin. You're also going to have private currencies like Facebook's attempt at Diem, and there will be others that will try to do this. And so when you get everything digital, right, and I think that's the kind of the first step that everyone focuses on, the competition at the technology layer essentially goes away. You get some level of feature parity. And sure, there's bells and whistles on each kind of implementation of a digital currency. But at the end of the day, the technology is relatively the same. And ultimately, what it will do is it will facilitate the adoption of digital wallets. So you have to have a digital wallet regardless of what digital currency you have. Same with me, same with everybody else in the world. But what it does do is when you kind of push away and reduce the friction of competition at the technology layer, it moves the competition to the monetary policy layer. And so when you get to that layer, now all of a sudden it becomes interesting because all of the currencies are the same, except for this one right now. And maybe there will be others in the future. But for sure, Bitcoin today, and people may try to replicate in a private manner or something, but Bitcoin is kind of the only finite, scarce digital sum money. And so when you then have that pretty big difference in that competition at the monetary policy layer, it's actually not going to matter where you get paid. Right. And what I mean by that is like you and I both live in a single currency environment. I get paid in dollars. I historically have saved in dollars. All of the assets in my life are denominated in dollars, and I owe my debts in dollars, whether it's taxes or in the private market. And I don't have to worry about foreign currencies. I don't exchange anything. The only time I would ever think about another currency is if I'm going to another country in their single currency environment. And in order to change or exchange my currency, I go to the bank or I go get ripped off at the airport, right? Like those are my two options. So it's high friction to change between currencies. When the competition of technology is kind of innovated away, now I can get paid in dollars, these digital dollars, and with a click of a button, switch into any other currency in the world. And so what ultimately happens is value and liquidity is going to coalesce around the best monetary policy. And so you get in this very weird world where even if the United States says, hey, you're going to get paid in dollars, you have to pay your taxes in dollars, you're going to start to see people operate in a multi-currency environment where they say, okay, I got paid in my digital dollar, click a button, I save in Bitcoin, it stays there, protects or grows my purchasing power. Oh, I need to pay my taxes. Let me switch back into dollars with a click of a button and pay. When you go to a multi-currency world, it's not just about currency. It's now a multi-asset world because not only is the currency digitized, but that same technology is used to digitize stocks, bonds, and commodities as well. And so today we live in a very fragmented financial world where basically I have a brokerage account, I have a bank account, I may have an alternative asset account, etc. When I can put all of those assets in a single digital wallet, and I can then go from asset to asset without having to go back to a single unit of account.
Like frictionless, going from asset to asset. Yeah.
So now what you end up doing is you start to open up the possibility for machine-to-machine transactions.
Yeah.
So today, if you and I write software code for two machines to transact with each other, they can't transact physical currency And in many cases, they can't actually transact the electronic QSIP currencies or assets either because there's too long of a settlement time. So you can't get true automation, right? So the whole idea of like the car's going to drive over a strip in the road and it's going to pay the toll, right? Well, that can't happen right now because literally the transaction won't go through, right? And so I always joke that like in an automated world, it's like a CD-ROM, but we're trying to take cassette tape player assets and put it in the CD-ROM. It's just incompatible technology.
References nobody understands at this point.
Exactly.
By the way, you need to update your references.
I probably do. It's like taking a CD-ROM, trying to put an MP3 player into streaming. But I think that the reason why that becomes really interesting is when you start to create these digital assets, now you open up the world of possibilities. So when new technology is created, you can do two things. You can either create new things the world's never seen before, or you can use it to improve the old world. Most people, because it's the easiest thing to think about, want to improve the old world. So an equivalent of this would be when the internet came along, a media company that had newspapers would say, hey, we should take a PDF of the newspaper and we should put it on a website. And now anyone in the world can go to this website and they can read the newspaper today. That was valuable, but it missed out on the ability to change headlines, to test, to put multimedia, to distribute it differently, to do all kinds of things that today we understand the internet really empowered. And so what I think we're about to watch happen is we're going to digitize the assets. We're going to put them all into these digital wallets. You're going to get automated technologies where machines can now transact with each other. And we're going to do simple things like, why do we pay people once every 2 weeks? Why don't we just pay them at the end of every day? Or why don't I literally stream payments to you on an hour by hour basis based on the work you do? It would solve incredible economic issues in our country and in countries around the world. But historically, businesses can't do this because of the technology problem. They can't keep track of it all. How do they pay everyone every day? How do they pay everyone every hour? Like, you just can't do it.
Yeah, it's funny. The vision of the future you're painting, it's kind of an exciting one. And it almost makes me sad looking into the future when we'll look back at this time. It's like how incredibly inefficient financial transactions were, like the transaction of value of any kind, like how like we have to pay each other, like there has to like processes, there's like payroll and all this kind of just the entirety of the transactions is just like painful. Almost all transactions are painful, and even and the companies that innovate to make the transactions a little bit more frictionless, like Amazon with a one-click purchase button, like went out huge, but even that's really painful. So it's actually really interesting, especially then you start to move that into the space of data. There's a lot of people thinking about privacy and data, and like, can we like convert data into like money, so that you can pay for how much you reveal to the companies about your own private data that can then be used to assign value to you, so you can use a service for free if you hand over the data, but there's like explicit transaction going on, so you can empower all those kinds of things that will just like fundamentally change our world. That's really 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 exciting.
One of the most interesting things to me is I invested in a company called Bridget, and what they told me was they said $8 billion was paid to the top 4 banks last year on overdraft fees. So literally, they took $8 billion from people who didn't have money in their bank account, right? And so when you dig into why is that, a lot of times it's not that the people don't have the money. It's actually a mismatch of the payments.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is you get paid on the 1st and the 15th, but on the 12th, your Netflix bill hits. On the 13th, you went grocery shopping. And on the 14th, your car payments hit, you overdraft. And then on the 15th, you actually get the check. And then you're able to pay not only the overdraft, but for the expenses that you have. And so something as simple as just getting paid at the end of every day immediately would eliminate, some big percentage of those $8 billion of value that flows to large institutions on overdraft fees.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this whole process with overdraft fees and just many of the financial transactions we have to live through today forces many of us to be like accountants, like to understand the different mechanism of financial, like the movement of money, as opposed to you, which is what we want to do as human beings, operating at higher layers of like providing services for others, of like following your passions and like working for others, like doing cool shit, or basically providing value, exchanging value in the world, and not thinking about the money. The money takes care of itself, and then you see the results of it. So you're able to think in terms of money, but not have to know how the accounting works.
Automation simply frees humans up to do more creative work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that. Like that's it.
Yeah.
And
which is why they use the term. Which is why you use the term automation, which I think is kind of brilliant reframing of all of this.
Yeah, because ultimately, digital technologies are merely the conduit to usher us into that world.
Yeah.
And I think the most fascinating part of this entire industry is people who are trying to figure out, now that we're going to have these digital technologies, how do we usher in that automated world faster? And so there's people who are building all kinds of incredible things, right? There's literally some technologies where you can stream for paying for consumption of content.
Yeah.
Right. I saw somebody recently who they basically said, hey, I have created something, but it's not going to be released until everyone in almost like a GoFundMe type situation pays for it in combination, then it gets unlocked. And so when you start to think about this, it's not only innovation on the technology front, it's innovation around the way that we form capital. It's the way that we organize resources. It's the way that we build companies. It's the business models, right? It's the application of those technologies. All that stuff starts to change. And go back to 2007 is when the iPhone came out. Uber wasn't possible, right? I mean, you just go down the line. Like all these companies that weren't possible before, when the digital technologies are kind of adopted on a global scale, I think that we all, myself included, drastically underestimate how fast and how big innovation can be, because it's just hard, right? Like we like to think linearly, and that's not how the world works.